Do you not?
I don't
And they're the ones that say they don't know Arabic. So
Wait a minute, is musician?
Yeah, bro.
and then some I've seen some go like this.
Yeah. 4 minutes long.
You seen that? They just go like
So it's on
whenever they
YouTube?
say solo.
It's on YouTube.
Yeah, that's right. Oh my god.
Oh, you know what I
No,
got to
they
do,
like,
bro?
maybe like this.
1 minute. Yeah, I have to change it so I can actually use the text
I've
box.
seen it many times. Yeah, every time they say home solo something, they go like, no, I'm telling you,
Go back to Google. I mean, not Google. And then just you can make me the moderator.
touch their eyes.
You click on captures. Captures. Well, you click on save. I'm sorry. Apologies.
I gotta show you.
It's on, by the way.
This thing is that.
Oh, you're recording?
Yeah, you can record it too.
Some people in
Yeah.
UK,
That's what my brother said. All
Alright.
right.
I've seen some people
I want to make it like close. Oh, you came back to that.
like they like touch your eyes. I regret it.
You'll find it. I know I will. I just you know how to you know how to say it? Pretty long. All right, so we're gonna start. Let's all sit over here. That way, what do you say? We'll let you show open the mic versus.
I told you, brother.
So they go like this. They go, Dr. Muhammad Jafar coming.
All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Inshallah, we're gonna start, and we're gonna have today's session is Brother Muhammad Sha'ir with philosophy discussion on Palestine, and then after that we have Dr. Muhammad Jafar discussing the negative and positive qualities of Allah or God as part of the Tawheed series, and then after that we will have Dr. Ali Musa Jafar discussing the effect of video games. He did some research, I think, when he was out in Iran, and he'll present some of his research to us, inshallah. To invite Brother Muhammad Sha'ir to the stand. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
As part of his theme, inshallah, for the discussion, we're going to recite the first page of Surah Yasin. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد
I would like to begin with a short Fatiha for all the oppressed people across the world, people in Congo, in Sudan, in Palestine, in Kashmir, in every corner of the earth. We gotta recognize that every day is Karbala, every day is Ashura, and every place is Karbala, right? So there's injustice across the world, and so please start super. And so I'm really hoping today we can get a discussion going and talk about a few of the themes that we've gone over so far in the past couple of weeks. I have this running topic of Palestine, and I've gone over a few different ideas, right? Uh, we talked about value, we talked about um, judgment, how you judge or decide things, and we have the differences between the worldview, ideology, right? I think it's really important that we always remember these things, because this is the framework that we're thinking of, right? So when I'm asking you to answer certain questions, it always come from a certain framework, this worldview, ideology, that framework. And then remember, when it comes to epistemology, we broke it down into four different areas. Um, we have the mystic, mysticism, mystic, right? And then we have reason, logic, we have spirit. And what's the last one?
Tradition.
Tradition. Anybody ever watched the movie Fiddler on the Roof? Yeah.
Back in with the Barbra Streisand.
Oh, Barbara Streisand is in it, but I had an amazing philosophy
1980s.
professor at USF who had us watch the movie. It's a classic that I think everybody should watch when it talks about tradition. But it just came to mind when I was mentioning we talk about tradition. But it's a movie I think everybody should watch. So these are some of the things and ideas we're talking about. And one of the ideas that we touched on last week was the idea of what makes or creates a state or a nation, right? Because we were talking about how we divide ourselves and understand. So, can anybody like tell me how we create states or nation states or countries or whatever you want to call it? How are they created?
Religion, sometimes.
Religion? Hey, what do you mean by that? So,
Like those beliefs that you evolve.
yeah, so it can um,
Language.
language. It's something that ties people together. So you guys are like giving me things that like tie uh, a group of people together. But like how, like let's say you're from Iraq, brother. Why don't the Kurds have a state?
Yeah, no, you're right.
Well, like right? Isn't that what we're talking about? Like you're talking about they share a religion, they share a language, they share like a ethnic group. They speak three languages, but they kind of have like similar geographic area, right?
The languages are related, but they're not the same.
Okay, so we have examples of like in the world where right now where we have issues in regarding like who should have a state, what a state is composed of. So, what should be the deciding factor? What is the defining factor, actually? Because there's an answer. I don't. Exerting influence. That's interesting. Exerting influence over what? Your influence. Very. Thank you very much. We're gonna come back to that. This is very important. Area. But I actually was. That's not. That's not it. So, exerting influence over a geographic area. So I like to use modern examples so we can try to get people interested. Is like what's going on in eastern Ukraine, right? Does Russia not have exerts influence over a certain geographic area? It does that over Crimea and eastern Ukraine, right? But would we say that Russia has annexed those lands and has done it properly and the international community has recognized it?
No.
So no, they haven't recognized it, right? So what is something that
Well, I mean, with modern times, I'd say it's recognition that matters.
recognition?
Sorry.
Yeah. I think both are very important because recognition is very important. If you're recognized and you actually exert influence, because we'll get back to this, it's very important. So this is very interesting how these differences actually kind of interplay throughout actually religion, right? How these underlying principles, right, impact how we understand the religion. So let's focus on statehood and nationhood, right? Like now, right? Let's try to break up different answers based off of worldview and ideology, right? So if I'm a neoliberal, anyone know what a neoliberal is? Kind of, yeah, sure. It's like liberalism. Anyone can define liberalism? Anybody?
Do they emphasize individualism a lot more than?
Liberty. So it's kind of related to liberty, but not really.
Like
Well, you're giving like parts of it. That's a part of liberalism.
in like philosophy, we learn that liberalism is it's like the political idea of like pushing things aside and like acting like they're not there. And like making like everything seem equal, but it's not.
Okay, so I think there's like a lot of modern leftist right ideas there. What I would say is that so let's write them out because I want to get to Islam, so I want to just use some examples before we get there. Let's just use the big one.
Brother Muhammad, the other marker may be a more effective.
So let's use communism. Okay, there you go. And capitalism.
Socialism.
Well, we'll just break it down these three just so we can like use two examples and then see like actually we're gonna break this up. Well, we'll break it up. So if you're a communist, what is the nation state, right? Because remember, even answering these questions, we gave these answers which are like our innate responses to this question. But like if you were like a devout communist, how would you answer this question?
Working class?
What makes up the state? Yes.
Working
class,
people.
yeah. People.
The people.
People. Proletariat. People.
Doesn't people include like bourgeoisie?
No, but okay, so
The common.
so remember we would say you're exerting influence over a geographic area and then you have recognition. So those are like kind of frameworks that we can use for what state and nation is. So as a communist, if I'm looking at which one, how am I defining what the state is? The state is the collection of the proletariat people who are controlling the distributing aspect, right?
You wouldn't recognize like the bourgeoisie.
Well, the state who controls the state.
Supposed to be proletariat.
Supposed to be the people.
Okay, so
Yeah, the common people.
that's
proletariat.
So if you're a communist, which you're like, that's
Oh, okay, that's like put yourself.
that's not their mindset, right? So now as a capitalist, what would you say is the state?
The companies.
The companies, I guess, if you're saying that,
Businesses, CEOs.
let's use democracy as an example.
I would say who controls the market would be the corporations who control the
That's
market.
what controls the state. I mean, that's the one that influence the government.
Public,
They buy the politicians out.
in a democracy, what is required?
51.
The consent of the people.
Yeah.
But it's direct consent. And a republic,
Representative.
yeah, it's representative. Right. How about Islam? That's what you know. Well, what would you guys say is the perspective of Islam on what defines a nation or state? Or actually, let's break it down because I think we can do it in politics. Like who has authority in politics? And then we can also think about it in terms of like how are a people divided, right? So it's not in the Quran, Allah mentions the division, like so there's a recognition of their peoples being divided into tribes and nations, right? But that doesn't really talk about like authority or politics, but it's just talking about the existence of a collection of people that are grouped together.
The like Dar Islam and Dar al is that the idea?
What do you mean?
So the term means like world of Islam and world of like.
What does that come from? What is defined for? What do you mean by that?
So that's in some sense, it's like if you sort of characterize it in that sense, it's like you're making a dichotomy between the world of like the Ummah, the Islamic community, versus the non-Islamic community. In that sense, if you have that like sort of parallel.
So think about it as citizenship.
Opposite.
Think about it as citizenship. Like, are you a citizen? What makes you a citizen of Islam, right? Like we have a faith, right? That's what's important. It's about what makes you a part of the community, what makes you a part of the nation, right?
Oh, okay.
What makes you a part of the state.
So,
So a belief system, right? You said faith, a belief system, right?
right.
So if you have certain beliefs, right, it's something that you're a part of. But I also want you guys to think about like where does do we have an example in our Islamic history? Do we? Of like the development of authority, like authority, wilaya, like.
So can you bring the mic closer? They're saying like. Sorry.
Is that better? Okay, so you just hit on it. What happened?
He created a state, an Islamic state.
Moved to Medina, exerting influence over a geographic area. Did he have a state before he went to Medina?
No.
No. But there was also but what's the other part? Was it recognized?
No, only by the Mennonites. The Meccans didn't recognize it.
Okay, so is recognition as important? Is recognition by the important?
Yeah.
It is important. Why do you think it's important?
In the formation of the state, recognition is the preliminary thing.
Yeah, so that's one of the things we put up here. But why? Make an argument for it. Like, why is it a preliminary?
You're saying global recognition, like?
No, but recognition by others. So you'll always have some people recognize and some people not. But like, is there some form of recognition that is required by anybody?
The subject
Is it required? Is it required?
As he was the leader of their country.
We're asking about, is it required?
Is it required?
We said exerting influence. We said recognition.
I think
Why?
there's the second-hand recognition.
Why?
Let's say if the Prophet was not recognized by the people of Medina, and he would have gone there and he would be placed on the head of the state, there would be disputes among the people, and there would be wars happening in that city as well. And he was also in a similar situation in Mecca, but he didn't take that position
Okay.
because there was disputes. So that's why he moved to a place that he could be recognized.
So there needed some type of recognition by the people. By the people?
So internal or external or both? I mean, I think
I don't know. So that's the question. So at what base level are you talking about recognition? Are you talking about recognition of the people who are allowing you to exert influence over them? So like we have influence over a geographic area. Are there people in that area, right? And so are those people the ones that you need recognition from? Or is it the people on the outside you need recognition from? Do you need recognition from within or from without? No. Can we ask that question? Do we need recognition from within or from without?
Within, for sure.
Within. So we have within. We have someone that says within. Does someone say without? Without? You think you need both?
Well, I mean, it depends on how you're defining state. I mean, if I'm able to, like, influence a certain area, then if I can do it without anyone's recognition, then a great state is just that I'm a dictator of some kind. But it's still a state. I don't know how you're defining state.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, depending on.
I mean, I think the weird thing over here is we're trying to define state in terms of these things, but instead, these things are what should define state.
Yeah. So elaborate. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, for instance, if I ask you to say what happiness is,
Okay.
that's a tough thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at a happy person, you know what happiness is.
Okay.
Same way, happiness is like the state.
So when you see a state, it's when it's a quacks like a duck, walks like a duck. It's a duck.
I think I agree with Mo, but I think actually whoever has the most wealth in the world determines what a state means, because they can
Wealth.
exert power to divide. That's what the British did. They had a lot of wealth. They just divided up the world, and
They didn't have the most wealth. The British never had the most wealth.
Well, wealth and power. Well, they had power. So wealth or power.
I mean, they basically.
Well, who had that? Who had control over that wealth in South America and in Africa?
They took control of it. That's how we got the wealth.
Okay. Wealth and power. So whoever is the wealthiest and most powerful defines it. That's it.
they define what a state is, and then everyone else has to buy into their game to become a state. And then I think when this wealth amount
Not
comes,
necessarily. Here's a perfect
when
example, right?
when this wealth amount comes, he'll throw that away, and he'll redefine what a state is.
So here's why your thing doesn't work, though.
No way. So that's very interesting. So you're saying, let me just so I can maybe everybody could understand your point clearly. So you're saying that at the current time we live in the reality of the situation is that what has defined the way we act in the world is based off of or defined by wealth and power, and everybody else defines by the wealthiest and most powerful.
And that's how you get recognition as a state. Like that entity has to recognize you. If they don't recognize you, you can't be a state. That's why Palestine's not.
So like the United Nations, you're talking about wealthy states like the United States of America or Russia, someone to back you. Okay.
That's how it is now.
So let's use Palestine as an example. So recently, there's been a few European nations that have recognized the state of Palestine. So they're like Spain, Netherlands, a few others, Ireland, that recognized a Palestinian state.
And there's a lot of East European.
But we know for a fact that Palestinians do not exert influence over their land. They're recognized by the maybe from within they're recognized. I guess we have the Palestinian Authority, but I guess we're coming back to this question in regards to this issue when it comes to Palestine, is that at the moment, who defines a state? Okay, so I want to make a distinction here. This is the last thing I'm going to do. So, one of the things I want to just make a quick distinction from. So, is this the reality of the situation? Of the situation? Or is that the truth of the situation, right? What is the truth? And how is it defined? I don't want to. No one's going to give me the answer to what the truth is because hatu burhanakum in kuntum sadiqin. So what is the burhan? How do you gain the truth? And what do we use for reality? So truth comes from where? Which one of these four things?
Truth comes from reason.
Okay.
Logic.
Okay. So you think truth comes from reason and logic. How about reality? Like how we're defining the reality of the situation is based off of experience.
Can't they be both? Truth and reality?
No, the source of truth comes from where? Like if I was gonna sit down and just like, Ali, where is the source of the truth?
In reality?
No. From epistemology, we broke down. Remember, in our past few discussions, we broke down the sources of information and knowledge are from mystical experiences, reason and logic, experience, and then from tradition.
The source of truth come from those sources of knowledge.
All four?
No, it has to point to one of them, right?
So I'm asking you. That was the question. So we had brothers say that truth comes from reason and logic, and reality comes from experience. So, and what I'm talking about is the reality of the situation, the truth of the situation. So we're talking about statehood. So when we're defining a state, the reality of situation is coming from experience, and the truth is coming from reason and logic or tradition. We can talk about that some other time. So I appreciate you guys all discussing this with us. Oh, there's a question.
There's a question on the chat actually.
Yeah, sure.
So I think it goes along with what is being discussed here. They're asking, just wondering if the recognition from the people matters, or if the priority is for Quran and Hadith. Because he's the
So that's exactly what we're talking about now.
the comment was referring, is saying, Imam Ali alayhi salam assignment, even though people can pick whatever.
Yeah.
Is it
So
people
that's the
or
difference.
Is it...
let me. I didn't really want to talk about this directly, but okay. What's the reality of the situation after the death of the Prophet? Right? What was the truth of the situation after the death of the Prophet? And that's for us as the followers of the Ahlul Bayt and the 12 Imams. So we make that distinction about what happened, and it's a real distinction. It's a real distinction, and I think we can see that here. Like when we're talking about something as simple as statehood in Palestine, and it's something that we can see. Is there any other questions? Anybody have any questions or like wants to just say something? Yeah.
How come you can't have like truth and reality be the same?
Because they're not the same thing.
Can't they be like co-determinant on each other?
Are they always mutually exclusive? I would argue that they aren't always.
Yeah, they're not always mutually exclusive, but they're not equivalencies.
They're not the same. So they're like overlapping circles.
I guess you could say that.
Like a Venn diagram.
Yeah. So you can have reality of the situation is one thing, but the truth is something else. But they're distinct, but they might share some commonalities. But they're distinct things.
So could you give me like an example of like something being part of reality but not being part of the truth?
Well, he just did.
Yeah, so the experience. So I experience, no. So my experience of reality is that there is a water in the desert. That's the reality of the situation for me. That's my reality. The reality of a schizophrenic is he sees, it's his reality. Is that the truth though?
Or what about a mirage?
A mirage, that's what I was saying. Mirage. I see water in the desert, but it's not really there. It's a mirage. I'm a schizophrenic. I see things. It's not. It's my reality. I'm living that, but it's not true.
Not like a shared.
It's not the truth. It's not the objective truth.
Is there a shared reality? That's a good question. I don't know if there is truly a shared reality.
It's not.
Because that would be.
If you're a schizophrenic, you don't share the same reality. That's like the normal. Like,
no, but you share. You have your own you have a reality, and it's your reality. It's based off of your experience. So you have a reality. It's not the truth.
Or like a paranoid person.
Or even like what we're going through right now, right? Let's talk about the simulation. What we're going through right now, is it real? I mean, is it the truth? Is it real? what's the distinction, right? Well, we know that, you know, most of things is empty space, right? We know that, you know, that there's a constant probability of what's going to happen next at the quantum level. Like the truth is, and our eyes only see a certain spectrum of the wavelength. We you know, our eyes are positioned at a certain level.
Dark matter is 70 to 80%.
You know, we can go on and on about the different things about what our experience of reality, or what we think is real is, and then what the truth of the situation is, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Jazakallah khair. Please, salawat. Okay, we got this. So.
So thank you, Brother Muhammad Shah. That was a very interesting discussion. Thank you. Inshallah, next we'll have Dr. Muhammad Ja'far, who will discuss the positive and negative qualities of God as part of the Tawheed series, inshallah. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Notes actually from last week are present on the back.
Oh, okay. Let me fix this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, inshallah. So, can people hear me on the? Yeah. Okay. Inshallah. Let me just switch this over. I'll go back to our notes from last time. Okay. So inshallah, since we have some new faces today, let's kind of review our arguments or what we discussed last time, and then we'll get into the gist of what we're going to talk about today, inshallah. So we'll try to keep it focused, because I think maybe 15, 20 minutes max. So, all right. So we talked about, last time we started getting into what are the proofs of the existence of Allah, right? The existence of God. And we talked about how Sheikh Misbah, again, the book that we're using for those who might have joined recently, is we're using a book called Theological Instructions. This is written by Sheikh Misbah Yazdi, one of the scholars in Iran, and he recently passed away, maybe about 3-4 years ago now. But he has written a book that summarizes, you know, theology, and specifically how he was a philosopher by his expertise. However, he tried to write a book that is a primer in terms of understanding Shia theology, but just Islamic theology in general. How should we understand our relationship with Allah, and how should we understand the different arguments that exist out there? It's very, obviously, when it comes to philosophy, you can go very deep, but he tried to write a primer text. And so that's what we're using in this course, inshallah. And it's been translated into English. It's available on alislam.org. I believe Brother Abdullah has shared some of the links to that book. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, so that book, if you guys want to review anything we talk about here, you can always go back to that. We're going to be talking about lesson 8 in that book. But before that, I just want to review lessons 5, 6, and 7 quickly, and then we'll move on to lesson 8. So please recite aloud salawat, and we'll start. So the arguments that he starts with, he said that basically you can start with a simplistic elementary understanding of the existence of God, right? And then you can get progressively more complicated as the individual progresses in terms of their mindset, in terms of their knowledge base, right? So he said one of the most simple arguments for substantiating the existence of God is what they call dalil al-fitra, right? Dalil al-fitra means instinctual proof. So meaning that every human being in their time of greatest need, when they are absolutely, surrounded from all sides, all corners, there tends to be, every human being has this instinctual drive to turn to a higher source, a higher power, right? A dependence. There's a human dependence on a unseen, supernatural, metaphysical force. That's
every basically society, we can see this tendency. First off, that they have created a metaphysical, they've reflected upon a metaphysical reality. That's number one. But then also, even on the individual, that's on the macrocosmic level, on the societal level. But then even every individual, even the most staunch atheist, Brother Abu Ayyub actually very recently he told me the story. He used to live in Russia, if you guys are aware. He used to live in Russia, and he told me that his teacher, he lived in the peak of communism, right, in Russia, and his teacher was a full-on communist, right, and he was teaching him how, like, basically the arguments that God does not exist, right. This is like a huge part of communist doctrine, that there is no God, right. So they were teaching Abu Ayyub all these things, and they were like, okay, Abu Ayyub, to graduate from the communist kind of manifesto course that they had, you need to prove to me that God does not exist, right? So Abu Ayyub was like, no, I can't do that. I believe in God, right? So they gave him an alternative project to talk about Soviet history and such. But it's very interesting, Abu Ayyub told me that the same teacher who taught him all these arguments about why God doesn't exist, right? He later on found out that that teacher was in the hospital, very, very sick, severely, on the brink of death, right? And he went and visited him, right, in the hospital. And at that point, this individual, feeble as he was, in the hospital, very sick, he was saying that I'm turning to God, I'm turning to God, and I'm hoping that God will cure me, And this was very interesting because this staunch atheist who his entire life rejected the existence of God, now in his time of need, in his time of dependence, he turns to God, right? So what is this? It's, again, the instinctual proof that a human being has, right? That we naturally have this inclination, this psychological inclination to turn to this higher power. So on a very basic level, this is sort of how many of our prophets came even to their people, right? They came with this argument that, is there any doubt about God? Like, you yourself recognize this inclination within you that you naturally turn to a higher power, right? So that's one of the first things that Sheikh Misbah talked about. Second argument, he said, is the argument from design. Can anybody explain that from last week? We talked about it. Anybody remember and can kind of summarize it? Argument from design?
Cause and effect.
Oh, that'll be a separate discussion. But the first one we're going to do is Burhanun Nazm. Burhanun Nazm is the argument from design.
Complexity is not spontaneous, or complexity is not unplanned.
Okay, yeah. Complexity is not unplanned, right? That the universe, a lot of people, they've summarized it like this. Look, if I had a cell phone in front of me, I said it just came out of nowhere, nobody would believe that. They would say, well, there's so much design in this, there's so much technology, it can't just have poofed out of nowhere, right? So the same thing, universe, if you look at it, our creation, our universe, just our Earth in particular, you see all the design, you see all the, different layers of organization. That can't have just come out of nowhere, right? So
intentionality, I feel like in how it's a specific way.
Yes, exactly. Now, we talked about this in particular being another very, very intuitive way of understanding the existence of God, right? That, well, the universe is naturally ordered, so there must be an organizer, right? And so that's very intuitive, makes complete sense. Brother Abdullah?
I think one thing we didn't mention last week, you bring up intentionality or directionality. An argument that's against, argument for design is chance. They're like, oh, it's all random, it's all chance. But actually, if you statistically look at chances of the directionality that's occurring, right, of this, of a cell and of, tissues and organs and all this complexity forming, if you want to look at it statistically, that happening versus chance, it would not be from chance. If you look at it statistically.
That kind of leads into the final argument for contingency, where it's like all of these possibilities needed to happen for it to come out like this.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So already, you're kind of seeing how these arguments can kind of tie together, right? In many ways, the argument from design, I think, is sort of like Brother Sha'ir and Brother Abdullah are saying, that it's kind of like stacking probabilities, right? So what is the probability of, human life existing like in this fashion as it does in the universe, completely, as a sudfa, as a just a complete chance, right? You'd have to, if you were to calculate it out, all the coincidences that would have to happen, it would probably be like one in a trillion or even more, right? 1 in a trillion chance, or probably even more in terms of higher numbers, right? So very, very unlikely. So because of that, the alternative is that this is created by an intellectual force, intelligent design, right? So in that sense, that argument makes sense in many ways. A lot of atheists cast aspersions on this, though. They say, well, what kind of God makes an eye with the photoreceptors in the back? I mean, that's not. If you're going to engineer something, why are you going to do it that way? They try to find little faults here and there, and what they think, the universe could have been better organized in their opinion, right? So, and a lot of that is their own subjectivity, right, coming into the question. But the reality is that there's symmetry, there's design, and it's hard to explain that away with just invoking random chance,
Also,
right?
the science is based on finding wisdoms or finding intentions, basically, right? Finding reasons.
Yes, exactly. All right, so very good. So that's argument of design. And then we talked about argument from causation. We talked about how this is a very weak formulation. And this is probably one of the more philosophically, we're getting more now, just like a little more philosophically complicated, right? But the argument from causation, in brief, is that every effect has a cause. The universe is an effect. Therefore, the universe must have a cause, right? And we say, well, it's impossible for you to have this, basically regression of infinite effects, right? There must have been a start to all of this. So this is an argument that a lot of people use when they're discussing with atheists, right? The problem with this that we said, though, is that a lot of atheists argue that, oh, well, on the quantum level, causation breaks down. You can have an effect before a cause. That's one thing. And then the second thing they say is, well, why, if you say every effect has a cause, the universe is an effect, why can't I say God is an effect? God is an effect, so who's the creator of God, right? So it creates they cast arguments like this that confuse people, right? So
the universe is a cause.
yes. And this is Bertrand Russell very famously said, he said, oh, well, I always kept hearing all these theologians saying, oh, that the universe is an effect and that it must have had a cause. But then they don't tell us who is the cause of the cause. Who is the cause of the first mover, God, right? So basically they present this argument, right? And so the real unique thing that Sheikh Misbah does in this book is he presents an argument from contingency. And you guys remember that concept, contingency? Do you remember how we discussed it last week?
In contrast to necessity, like
yes, yeah, necessity versus contingency. And we talked about 3 concepts, right? Wajib, mumkin, and mumtana, right? These are 3 Arabic terms, right? But can somebody kind of summarize what does contingency mean?
It doesn't have to be. It could be otherwise.
Yeah. Contingency means it could be otherwise, right? It's a possibility. Contingency means that basically it requires something to exist, right? It requires other things to make it be, right? Not necessarily a direct cause, but in the sense that it requires certain conditions, a certain sort of environment in order to materialize. That whatever thing requires certain conditions to make it materialize is called contingent, right? Something which is necessary, wajib, as we said, means that it doesn't matter what conditions exist. It always is, right? It always exists. It doesn't require any conditions or certain environment or formulation to kind of, come to being, right? So that's what we said is necessary, right? Mumkin, possible, meaning that if the conditions are right, it'll materialize. If the conditions are not right, it won't materialize.
Even the statement "come to being" is not even a logical statement to make on something that's necessary.
Yes.
There is no come to being.
Ahsant. Yeah, actually, that's a great correction. Yes. So something that's wajib, and we're going to get into this in this next lesson, that something that's wajib, it can never not be, right? It always is, right? So because the condition, it has no relevance, there's no connection at all to conditions or circumstance, right? And then we said, so all existing things, everything that you can imagine, falls into one of these 3 categories, either necessary, possible, or impossible, right? Impossibilities would be things like a square circle, right? It's impossible, right? For something to exist and not exist at the exact same time, that's impossible, right? So things that are contradictory are logically impossible. They can't be. But possible means it could happen. It could possibly exist. It's feasible, but it just needs the right conditions, right? And then necessary means always existing, right? So what we said was, if you guys remember this, does anybody remember the example of the light switches? Can somebody tell me how we use that to understand contingency?
Yes. So it's binary where it's on or off.
All right. So we said necessary, right? This pen's not that great. Yeah. Let's see. This one might be a little bit better. All right. So okay. Necessary existent. Oh, it's worse. Okay. Well, we'll just make do with this. Yeah. Okay. So necessary existent, right? What's the switch, right? Necessary existent is always in the on position, right? So if you had a switch, right, in the on, and we'll say off, right? There is no off, right? It's always in the on, right? So it's always on, right? And remember we said for a possible existent, what's the switch? On or off, right? So on, off, and we'll say, right, depending on the circumstance, right? And then impossible existent is always in the off, right? Okay, so now everything in the universe that we know of, right? Say there's no on, everything's in the off, right? So everything in the universe that we know of is a possible existent because it needs the right circumstances to come to be, right? So basically you can think about it, possible existence, their natural default position is going to be in the off position, right? And they need something to make them go into the on, right? Does that make sense? Everything that's a possible existent is naturally going to be in the off position unless it has the right circumstances or the right conditions to push it in the on, right? So that's, again, contingency, right? Necessary existence, they're in the on, this is in the on position, it will never be in the off position, right? It's always in the on. So now the thing is, we said that this is the better way to think about the argument from contingency is probably one of the best ways philosophically to argue for the existence of God. Why? Because if everything is kind of in the off position, right? Everything in the universe that we know of, we said, is in the off position naturally because it requires the right circumstances, the right conditions to make it exist, right? So everything is naturally in the off position. If everything was in the off position, nothing would turn on. Nothing could ever come to be, right? So you need something which is in the on position to change things that are in the off position into the on position. And that being has to always be in the on position, right? And we said that must be God, right? So this is the necessary existent. In Arabic, they call it wajib al-wujud. Wajib al-wujud literally means the necessary existent, right? So this is a far better way than using the argument from causation that has all these other issues, right? You need to have a being who is always in the on position, always existing, to allow other things to come to be, right? Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, does anybody have questions about that?
I think really the big distinction is the two words, existence and causation. I think that
yes.
is the distinction that people have to make in their heads.
Right.
Because nothing brought the existence of the wajib.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Brother Abdullah is getting to a very important discussion that we want to have today, which is, try to summarize because I think we've already almost hit 20 minutes. Okay, so there's what we call, so first off, okay, we substantiated positive attributes and we'll say negative attributes. So I'll kind of keep this focused because running low on time here. So, all right. Okay, so the thing is, once we substantiate that God exists, or that God is the necessary existent, we'll say, right? He is the being who is always in the on position. And then the question comes, okay, well, that's well and good. You said that there has to be some type of entity, some type of creation, or some type of existent being, right? That is always in the on position, right? But then, okay, well, how does that take us to God, though? This Abrahamic God that you Muslims believe in, right? How do you get that? How do you get to that? So Sheikh Misbah, he takes you step by step in the next coming chapters, and he goes through different proofs from this, starting from this concept of wajib al-wujud, of why specifically the Abrahamic God can be proven once you substantiate this argument, right? So the first thing that he does, though, is he talks about positive attributes and negative attributes. So positive attributes meaning those attributes that God must have, or that the necessary existent must have to be called the necessary existent, right? And what attributes can this entity not have, right? So positive attributes, we specifically said, Brother Abdullah alluded to this point, that this being has to always be on the on position. There can never be any point where it's not existing, right? So this is in Arabic, we call this sarmad. Sarmad, someone who's always been and always will be, right? So sarmad, sarmad, yes. With it's like this, sarmad, like this, sarmad, right? Sarmad, right? So sarmad means a being that has always been and always will be, right? So that's one of the attributes of Allah, right? That He is not dependent upon time. There wasn't a time when He wasn't, and there isn't a time that He will cease to be. He was al-awwal wal-akhir, right? He is the first and the last, right? In the sense that He always was and always will be, right? And why? Because that's what wajib al-wujud means, right? A necessary being has to always be on the on position, right? There's no possibility of it ever being in the opposition, right? So that's a positive attribute, right? So immaterial or independent of time, we'll say, right? Independent of time. Okay. So now I'm just going to give you a negative attribute that Sheikh Misbah talks about. So the other thing which is very important is that from a negative attribute is that we said that the necessary existent cannot be, there's no contingency, there's no dependence, right? And this also applies from an interdependent standpoint, meaning that the necessary existent cannot consist of parts, right? Cannot consist of compartmentalizations. You can't compartmentalize the necessary existent, right? Because if you could, then you could say, well, this part could be dependent on this part, or if I take away this part, then it stops being necessary, right? Then it becomes contingent, right? So it cannot, this necessary existent cannot be compartmentalized or broken down. It can't have separations, right? Yeah. So one of the things about material existence is that it has precisely this trait, right? For instance, look at this table right in front of us. If we take off one leg, it'll fall over, right? I mean, it's a table with four legs, right? You cut off one, it'll fall over, right? Same thing with we'll say for instance, anything in this room, right? You can take anything in this room. If I take a certain part of it off, right, it ceases to be what it once was, right? It ceases to carry that same existential, ontological, sort of materialization, right? This, for instance, whiteboard. If I were to cut off this half, it would fall over, right? So same type of thing. If God were a human being, right, then, for instance, if I cut off God's head, he ceases to exist, right? He's not a necessary existence, right? So that is precisely the issue with a lot of these materialistic type of philosophies, and also this anthropomorphization that you see in some religions where they say, oh, God is a human being, or God can be confined in a space, right? Because once you do that, you're making God dependent. He becomes dependent upon his individual parts, right? And we said that's impossible, right? So negative attributes, non-corporeal, right? Non-corporeal meaning that he is not physical, right? God cannot be physical because physicality by nature is limited. And it's interdependent, right? Even for instance, this I guess all these pews in front of us. If you were to cut off half the pew, the other half would fall over, right? You can't cut God. You can't break God down, in a way that would make God cease to be the necessary existent. If it was possible to do that, then he's by nature mumkin. He becomes possible, right? He becomes contingent on his own individual parts. So does that make sense to you guys?
So is this related to the concept of kamal, where he's complete on his own and there's nothing else that supports or is a part of him?
Yes, in that sense, yes. God is absolutely, perfect, right? He's absolutely perfect, and it's impossible to compartmentalize him or break that perfection down. Is that kind of what you're alluding to?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's simplistic perfection is the best way to say it, right? So we say simplistic. So this is what simplistic means. Simplistic meaning in the sense of indivisible, right? Indivisible. God cannot be broken down into parts, right? This is a positive attribute of God, right? Perfection. Perfection is actually one that I want to expand upon a little bit more. Perhaps next time, inshallah, we'll have some more time to do that. But non-corporeal, the other thing is we say non-temporal, right? Why? Because remember, this goes back to the independence of time, but also in the sense that what you could do, right? God is independent of time in this sense. Like, for instance, let me take Abdullah, for instance. If I were to cut off Abdullah from his childhood, from his adolescence, right? If I were to completely eliminate that, right? This is even theoretically, right? I say Abdullah as a person is a spectrum. Up till this point, he's had his experiences. If I were to cut that part off, Abdullah would not be Abdullah anymore, right? So the same thing with God. Like, if God were temporal, right? God was limited in space, or limited in time rather, or he traversed through time, I could cut off God's timeline, right? And as a result, God would cease to be. He would have, if he were changing, if he was subject to time in the sense that he changes over time, then I could divide him. You see, I could divide him in time. I could divide and say, oh, this half of God, right, it's what determined God today, right? It's God becomes conditional. He becomes contingent upon his previous self, right? Like Abdullah is contingent, he's dependent upon his previous self, the sum of all of his previous experiences, right? So if God were dependent upon his previous experiences or his previous, creations or whatever experiences that God had, then he ceases to be God. Because if I were to cut that off, even theoretically, if I even presume the theoretical possibility of being able to split God, he ceases to be God, right? He becomes possible. Does that make sense? So it's a little bit theologically complicated, or it's a little bit philosophical, but do you get what I'm trying to say? Okay, yeah. So we talked about, summarize then, God is independent of time, he's simplistic, indivisible. Negative attributes, he cannot be limited into a body, time, or basically he's independent of time, space, or matter, right? I think we'll stop here, inshallah. Please recite aloud salawat, inshallah. Did anybody have any questions?
So some would say, if the universe is infinite, or if the multiverse is infinite, what could God not be the universe?
So you see, all the materialistic arguments, they all fall flat on their face with this type of discussion, right? When you understand things from a necessary existence standpoint, materialism completely shatters. Why? Because material by definition can be broken. It can be divided. It's dividable, right? It's not indivisible. So matter by nature is like that. You know, all corporealism, everything that can be limited in time, space, or matter can be broken down, right? And you can postulate interdependency between its parts, right?
And something that broke it down too.
Yes.
Something broke it down, which means that something overcame its unity.
Yes, yeah. So that's the other thing. It's like if you can subject God to your mind and be able to compartmentalize him, right? Then you're basically saying that the human being is capable of dividing God, right? And so then the question arises, okay, well, God has 99 attributes, right? So yeah, so the thing is, we say that it's impossible for a human being to understand God, right? So he's actually all of these things simultaneously at once in a simple essence, right? That he's all of these attributes to their utmost perfection, but all of them at the exact same time without any division, right? So he's infinitely merciful, infinitely powerful, infinitely Ghafur, infinitely Aziz. He's all of these things at once, but there's no compartmentalization in God's essence. It's not like, oh, he's this at one point, he's that at another point. He's all of those things simultaneously, right? So that's very important, and it's impossible for a human being to understand that. That's why we compartmentalize these 99 names, but really, it's an incorrect, it's still, like we say, Allahu Akbar, right? Allahu Akbar min an yusaf. That's one of the things that it's mentioned in our riwayat. Someone asked the Imam, what does Allahu Akbar mean, right? God is the greatest. He said, it means God is greater than any type of description. Than you can possibly describe God. God is infinitely more than that, infinitely greater than that, right? So the reason is because it's impossible for a human being to understand that. All 99 of these attributes that seem to potentially contradict with each other. You know, he's Rahim, and he's also Aziz, right? He is Al-Qabid, he's Al-Basit, he's the one who seizes, and he's the one who expands. He's all of these things at once, right? And it's not possible for a human being to comprehend that, you know? But that's God. That's God in the sense of being absolutely simplistic in his essence, but yet at the absolute level of perfection, right? At all perfection, right? So I hope that makes sense, inshallah. And I think it's a very deep. Obviously, we could go very deep theologically, but this is Sheikh Misbah has it very focused in his the way he presents this, you know. So inshallah, we'll continue this inshallah next week.
One more level. That's why I think Jews, Ism al-A'lam, right? Sometimes they say it's Yahoo, right?
Yeah.
Him,
Yeah.
It's like you're pointing at that one or that because you can't describe.
You can't directly point it. It's that one.
That one.
You know what I'm talking about. I
The
can't
one
point
or
it
that
out.
one. Yeah. Ahsant. Yeah. I mean, you can get very mystical with it, you know. Subhanallah. Yeah.
Asma and Sifat.
Yes. So asma and sifat, so the asma and sifat, they're kind of used in a almost interchangeable way, you know, in many ways. But I would say I think a lot of people will kind of divide it that way. But there is kind of a difference in the sense of asma are the actual names, right? Whereas the sifat are kind of the attributes, right? So when you have like a name Ar-Rahman, right? It gives you that, it's one of the names of Allah, right? But it has the meaning of Rahma, it has that sifa, that description, right? That's one thing. The second thing is really in terms of when there's certain names of God that are kind of what we call tawqifi, right? Tawqifi means that they're mentioned in the Quran and they are confirmed that these are actual names of Allah, right? And there's like, for instance, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Aziz, Al-Ghafur. All these things are basically attributes of God that are mentioned in the Quran. They're tawqifi, meaning that they've been told to us that these are things that God is, right? From our riwayat, from the Quran. But then there's as-sifat, which are kind of a little bit more generic, and they're descriptors, right? and they don't necessarily fall under this purview. Like for instance, many of the names in Dua Joshan, for instance, there other things that are not necessarily even mentioned in the Quran. Like those would be kind of sifat, in the sense they're descriptors, right? They're descriptors of God, but they are not al-asma. Al-asma, the names of God, they're, yes, al-asma al-husna. These are tawqifi, meaning that they are given to us by the Prophet and by the Quran through wahi. They've been given to us, right?
Can you break down the meaning of the Arabic word ism?
Yeah. So ism actually there's two potential roots for it, right? It could come from wasama or sama, right? This word ism, right? So ism, it generally means, wasama means to brand something, or to, when you say asimu hadha, it means like you've kind of branded it, or you've given it a stamp, right? So basically, this is what the word wasama means in Arabic, right? Wasim is also used in this sense. You say someone is wasim, in the sense that they have good features, right? It's used in that sense, right? But wasama means to brand something, or to give it a distinctive feature, right? So that's wasama, and so ism has that meaning, right? But some grammarians say no, the word ism comes from the word sama. Sama means to be elevated, right? So for instance, the word as-sama, right? Heavens above us, right? So as-samawat, right? This word sama, right? Some grammarians say that the word ism is actually derived from this, right? This word specifically. What that indicates is that an ism, a name, is actually that which raises something in terms of giving it recognition. It gives you awareness. It gives you ma'rifah of that thing, right? So, yes. So a name is what gives. Yeah, it's like you can imagine. It's like I guess theoretically, thinking about it from a philosophical standpoint, it's like when you give a name to something, it's as if you're raising it, right? You're making it apparent, right? Yes. So that's how the word ism has that meaning too. So it's a very disputed discussion. Which root does it come from? But you can take it from both.
So you're
Yes.
making something distinct, and by making it distinct, you're elevating it.
Yeah.
But,
Ahsant.
because by distinguishing it from others, you're elevating it.
Yeah, exactly. And the word slifa has a different. Slifa just means a descriptor, right? A way that you're able to describe something. Wasf. It comes from the word wasf, right? Wasf means to sort of enumerate the features of something, right? That's wasf, right? In the sense of explaining or expounding upon a feature of something is a wasf, right? Or a sifa. Sifat is kind of the plural of that, right? So that's the difference between sifat and asma. Asma are tawqifi, they come straight from Allah, and they're names that Allah has told us that this is how I want you to call me, right? Whereas sifat is more generic, and you can add a lot of things under this header that we often see in Dua Joshan, for instance, Yeah, the 1,000, those are kind of like sifats, they're not really in the sense of actual asma. Al-asma al-husna are like very specific, and they come from the riwayat and from the Quran.
Is simahum related to asma, or is that different?
Yeah, I guess that would be your distinct. I guess it would come from the derivative of that first.
Wasam, maybe.
Yes. Simahum, yeah, this comes from that same root. Simahum fi wujuhim min athar as-sujud, for instance, yeah. So this word comes from the same kind of root, right?
It's again the al-batin, again, it's similar, right?
Yes.
The sujud has caused
a distinction on your face, and it's also elevated.
Yeah.
Whether physical or physical, I'm not sure.
No, it has elevated.
Perfect. What other questions you guys have? Yeah?
I do have one question.
Okay.
I know you mentioned the attributes of Allah. They're all at the highest level, all of them, the utmost level, right? So I know one of the sort of cornerstone of our Tawheed in Islam is about, right?
Right.
Right. He has to be all just, but he's also all merciful, correct?
Right.
So in a certain sense, if he is all just, right? Then in that way, he can't be all merciful, right? If he's being all just, he has to enact sort of punishments or do out justice, which might not be merciful. Correct?
And mercy is not justice. By
They're
definition.
not equivalent.
Yes.
Yes, they're not.
Like if one is higher than the other, like for instance, if adalat is sort of the pivotal amount, then you can't have mercy to that same level, right? Because it's just sort of like a balance almost.
Okay. I was gonna say that what that makes me think of when you try to reconcile these two different things between like mercy and justice is that okay, you can't reconcile it. Can you conceive of a being that can reconcile it? And yeah, that's the first thing. But the other thing I thought of with these two different things is that also what our perspective is I think what will happen, right? So we approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a very specific way, right? You know, that you're not supposed to give up in the mercies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so if you ask him for that mercy, I think he will treat you with that mercy. And you know, there's a dua, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not to treat us based off of ibadah, but treat us or to and on the day of judgment treat us based on his rahmah. And so we are asking Allah to do something in a specific way. So I think it's coming from us making the dua from our certain perspective of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
It's a just answer to the request.
It's because we see it in that way.
Yeah.
Because we can't fully reconcile it. And so we are like, yeah, Allah, please treat us with your rahmah, not your adalah, because I can't conceive of those two being reconcilable. And so I'm asking for one over the other.
Yeah. So let me just give a slightly different flavor to that answer. So I think the best way to understand it is like this. You know, to receive the mercy or the justice of God, right, is what you're saying, right? And okay, well, if he's giving you mercy, then he's not giving you justice, right? And if he's giving you justice, he's not giving you mercy. So what does that mean? So basically, think about it in this way, that God is infinitely merciful and infinitely just simultaneously. Yes, but when it comes to creations, right? The way that basically God's tajalli or God's manifestation comes upon you is in accordance to your nature, right? So there are some beings who are deserving of mercy, right? Or they have sort of an inclination already towards God's mercy. Or they have sort of a natural predisposition to invoking God's mercy, right? And then there's some beings that have a natural predisposition to invoking God's wrath and God's anger and God's justice, right? So it's not God who is compartmentalized, it's us who's compartmentalized. It's human beings, right? So there are some human beings who get God's mercy because it's sort of like, you think about it so there's a beautiful verse in the Quran, and this is I think one of the best ways to understand this principle I'm trying to tell you. So it says, أنزل من السماء ماء فسالت أودية بقدرها, right? So it says that Allah is the one who sends from the heavens water, right? And then basically different valleys fill up to their capacity, right? So this is just try to understand this analogy because it's very powerful. And this is actually, Tabatabai has used this analogy to explain this concept, in fact. So he says, look, God, his mercy, basically all of God's providence, meaning all of God's blessings, all of God's tajalliyat, or you can say God's manifestations, ascend upon all of creation simultaneously, right? But different creatures have different capacities, right? And so every creation fills up to its capacity, right? So if your capacity is shaitan, right? If you're, for instance, a creation like shaitan, he's also getting God's tajalliyat or God's manifestations, God's effulgence, you can say, coming down upon him. Water, right, is descending. But shaitan can only fill up like this much, right? Because he doesn't, because of his own nafs, because of his own ego, he only gets this much of Allah's mercy. He only gets this much of Allah's basically manifestations coming upon him.
You say naturally his choices. You're not saying
Yeah.
God meets his nature this way.
Yes, of course. No, I mean this.
I recently heard the analogy of us being like vessels.
Yes.
Where we are a vessel, and what are we accepting into ourselves?
That's exactly what I'm getting at. Yes. So it's like you yourself are a vessel, and God Himself is sending basically His effulgence upon you, His infinite effulgence upon you, but you can only fill up to a capacity. So if that capacity is mercy, then it's mercy. If it's justice, then it's justice, right? But you yourself are kind of channeling what the nature of God's tajalliyat, or God's manifestations, God's effulgence is, and what that nature, how is that going to manifest upon you, right? But God Himself is infinitely merciful, infinitely powerful, infinitely just, all simultaneously. But it's just the creations are different, right?
She's like in a certain sense, I'm not comparing it like Allah to the sun, but in an analogous way, almost like a sun, right? And it's beaming its sunlight.
Yes, yeah. This is
certain like plants only receive so much sunlight.
Yes.
Versus other plants who might receive even more sunlight.
Yeah.
Some may need less.
Yeah, and some because they're so like cocooned up, they don't get any sunlight, right? And it's their own fault because they're cocooning themselves up, right? They choose to grow. Yeah, they choose to grow under the ground.
Make their nature.
That's a distinction we have to make.
That's like predestination, though. That's like
exactly. So they chose to go under the ground.
So it's not predestination.
No. Okay. At least.
Yeah. No, for sure. Yes.
It's like it's your choice. It's your will. So if I could be like, you know what, I don't want this, and then just bask it as
you have that choice. That's the whole idea of choice. You're making that choice of what are you willing to accept in your life. Like I was actually talking to one of my mentees about this. Like, well, what are you willing to accept in your life? Like, are you gonna take it or are you gonna leave it? It's your choice. It was like a professional setting. Like, are you gonna leave this job or are you not gonna leave this job? Well, you gotta make a choice. You're gonna do one or the other. What are you gonna accept in this job? It's like, oh, do I want to accept the headache and the people's attitudes and the negative work environment, right? That was surrounding that person and that was impacting how they felt, right? And you can make a choice to leave that environment, so you can maybe be exposed to other things. So like, one of the scariest verses for me growing up was a verse where I don't know, you can complete it.
No, please, yeah. What is it? Oh, yeah, يا ليتني لم أتخذ فلانا خليلا. Yeah.
So, this is very scary because this is like, oh, yeah.
It means, oh, woe upon me that I wish I hadn't taken such a person as a friend, right? Such and such person as a friend.
Khalil means friend, but it's someone who's near you, right?
Yeah.
And so, these people, just as an example, whatever you let near you or by you will impact you, will affect you.
But it's all
what you're accepting. So it is an active choice. Yeah, where you accept that he is mentally, physically, emotionally. You made a physical choice.
But there's also
Okay,
certain things
inshallah.
that are
Yeah.
like character, personality.
Right.
Some of that runs through genes, though.
Yeah, I mean, there
you just have to fight against those weaknesses.
there are some things there. Yeah, so amongst the Shia, the what is it, the Mu'tazilis, they would say, oh, you're completely a free agent.
Yeah.
But the Shia, they believe no, it's between those two extremes. You have some things you can control, some things you can't. But Allah only holds you accountable for the things you can control, right?
Like where you're born, who your parents are,
Yeah.
how much wealth you're going to have. There's certain things you can't.
What if you for example, someone who's born with a kid who's born with what is that thing when the parents drink?
Yeah, like
Fetal alcohol syndrome.
yeah, Right.
So they may be normal in appearance, but that may have affected their mental, their brain function,
Yeah.
the way they process information,
Right.
right?
Yes.
So when they make a choice, they may make a choice, even though it's free will. Their free will might not be as free as you think it is, because it might be sparked by a certain mental chemical that goes in their brain. They make a quick choice versus a choice that they would normally think through.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So Allah is so merciful that in that case, He becomes the mercy because He knows why you made that choice, even though the people may judge you. You know what I mean?
He knows the true justice.
Exactly. He knows exactly.
That guy may go to heaven before you because
but someone else looking from outside say, "Oh, what an idiot! Look at the choice they made." Right? But Allah knows that He made that choice based on his situation, that he couldn't even help something.
I think
You know,
that's
does
all
that make
that's
sense?
and I think that's all that's expected from any of us.
Yeah, I know, but
All of us.
yeah,
Like, just do what you can.
Yeah. I mean,
it's not.
but Allah, yeah, Allah does. There's a verse, right? What is it? لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah only, Allah does not burden a soul beyond what its capacity is. He doesn't burden a soul except what it is capable of, right? So if Allah has given you certain limitations, right, and certain restrictions, and you can't exert that full spectrum of free will as a consequence, or you're limited somehow by your brain chemistry or by your experiences. I mean, Allah is aware of all of that, right? Allah is what we call khabir, meaning that He is all cognizant of everything. So of course, every creature has his own hisab, or his own accountability, right, in front of Allah.
Is that where like Christians always say, don't judge anyone?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Like that's a big thing with them, right? Like
Yes.
Muslims, they tend to judge, right?
Right.
Far about, because we always judge haram and halal, right or wrong. But
Right.
there is a point where ultimately, you still cannot make that full judgment. That judgment only rests with Allah anyway.
Oh, definitely.
Because you don't know
Yes.
someone. We said in Islam, we said we don't know someone's intentions.
Yes.
It's not always intentions. It could be also
Information,
misinformation, or maybe they don't have the capacity to do the proper thing.
Right.
Truly, they don't have the capacity.
Yes, of course.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yes. No, definitely. I mean, that's the nature of this world, right? There's always misunderstandings, misjudgments that people have, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about God. Like he's all aware of his creatures, right? There's a verse, أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ. Would God not know that which He's created? Of course God knows, right? وَهُوَ اللَّطِيفُ الْخَبِيرُ. He knows. Even latif means like He knows those minutia, those things that are so hidden, right? He knows al-latif, and al-khabir is the one who's all aware, right? So they say that there's actually a difference between latif and khabir. Latif is someone who knows kind of what they call the daqa'iq, the minutia, right? And khabir is someone who knows the khafaya, or basically what's hidden about someone, right? He knows the hidden and the apparent, right? So khabir is in the sense of all cognizant, someone who's all aware, all cognizant of all the details, right? Or of all basically the inside of someone and the outside. And then latif is not necessarily, it's not all comprehensive like that. It's talking about the small little details of, he's subtle. People translate it as subtle. The subtle, the aware, right? But subtle, it's in the sense of he understands the subtleties, right? He understands the subtleties, right? Whereas khabir is in the sense of actually he understands the zahir and the batin. He understands the full picture. So it's kind of like saying, like, the details and you also know the big picture, right? So that's what al-latif al-khabir means. It means God knows all the little details and He also knows al-khabir. He knows the big picture, right?
Basically, Yusuf added that story. I think
Yeah.
it was also mentioned there, where if you look at this story, the small events that happened leading up to the big conclusion in the end.
Yeah. So of course, I mean, that verse, it's a beautiful verse, and it encapsulates everything you just said. That Allah knows all those little things. He knows each one of us down to, like, the tiny nitty-gritty details, and He also is understanding of, like, our interactions between each other and how that all plays out. So of course God is the best of judges. All right, inshallah. Ali Musa, inshallah. Please recite a salawat.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muhammad Jafar. Inshallah, if we hand that to
Yes.
Dr. Ali
Inshallah.
Musa.
Could you help hand these out? Yeah.
And he's gonna, inshallah, discuss to us some of his research that he did in Iran, based on video games and the relation to us, inshallah. Maybe if you want to flip that board, I think that would probably be helpful. Yeah. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
Okay, so we're going to right here.
Sit down, brother. There's some cookies and donuts. Sorry, it's just purple and a half.
Okay.
Some like eclairs.
All right. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. So this is just like a short practical lesson to illustrate some of the concepts, because there's a lot of theoretical concepts we're learning, but the question is, how can we apply it in today's world that we live in? So this sort of kind of superimposed circles this is like a really practical way to understand everything that we buy, anything that we consume, is a product or attraction. But when you consume this product or attraction, you're taking the whole package. You can't just take the product and attraction and leave out the ideology and the worldview, because all of these are hidden. So whatever product or attraction you're buying, whether it's a camera, whether it's a video game, whether it's even food, it has an ideology associated with it, and then you're also consuming the worldview associated with that. So you can go into sort of philosophy and sort of think about the fast food industry. Does that have an ideology associated with it? Does it have a worldview associated with it? It definitely does. And when you're consuming fast food, you're indirectly buying into that ideology, buying into that worldview, and it's impacting you. So video games are especially powerful. In the handout, you can read the reason why I chose to analyze it while I was traveling in Iran with our group is for two main reasons. One thing is it's sort of an active participant. So as opposed to social media even or entertainment, when you watch a movie, you're watching that screen. Whereas in the video game, you're playing it as well. You're actually performing actions in game that character is doing. So there's the active component and the passive component. So in that way, when you play a video game, it has a much stronger impact on your ideology and worldview, because you're playing out the character in addition to watching the character, as opposed to watching a movie or seeing something on social media. Those as well have another discussion, like the impact of social media on your worldview, the impact of watching a movie on your worldview. But video games are especially powerful because they have two components to them, the active and the passive component. The second thing is video games are targeted toward young children who actually have not really developed their worldview. Like if you have, let's say like us, most of us being like in our mid-20s to early 30s, if we play a video game, it probably won't affect what we believe that much. But if you give it to a 10-year-old and they start playing it, they're actually going to start doing things, like they're going to start changing how they talk, how they behave, because they haven't formed their worldview yet. They're in a very sensitive stage of developing that. So that's why video games deserve a special discussion. So the three things that the article talks about, I think, could be best illustrated through a skit. So when we actually presented this, when I was in the group, we actually did a skit. So I can't do it because I don't have all the participants, but basically how it worked is we had a 15-year-old who had just become baligh. His parents had taught him how to pray. He's in high school. But right when he comes back from high school, mashallah, he right away goes on the prayer mat, does his Dhuhr, Asr, Salat. He helps his parents cook the dinner, set the table, everything. He's very respectful to his parents. He spends time with his mom, spends time with his dad. So he's doing all the right things, mashallah. He's checking all the boxes for his wajibat. And then he notices that his friends tell him that this game called GTA, Grand Theft Auto, is really fun, right? And then we have in the skit, Shaitan in the background is sort of going like this, like, yeah, go ahead and get that game, because Shaitan knows what's up. As soon as he buys that game, what's going to happen. So this 15-year-old gets the game, much to his parents' reluctance, trying to convince him, you don't need this game, you're doing everything right, just keep doing what you're doing, but he wants the game. So he gets the game, he starts playing it. So the first thing he notices is there's a lot of things in that game that he's never seen before. He sees women that are dressed inappropriately that he hasn't seen before. He sees stealing cars, gambling, all these things that really he's heard that they're bad, but now he's playing it in game. So he's playing with the character. They're going to a club. They're gambling. They're doing all these things. It's not he's not he thinks I'm not sinning because I'm just doing it in the game. But then gradually he plays that more and more, and then he starts when he comes back from school, he starts playing the game instead of praying. So he starts delaying his prayers because he wants more of the game. So this is the first thing actually is video game addiction. Is the third aspect that's harmful. So first thing, he gets addicted to the game, so he wants more pleasure from playing the game. And the second thing, he starts disrespecting his parents because he wants to play the game. His parents go tell him to pray, to go set the table, and he just wants to play the game. So he starts sinning in that way because disrespecting your parents is a sin in Islam, but he's not realizing that because of the video game addiction. And then the third thing, he sees that this video game player is doing gambling. He looks like he's having a lot of fun. So when he gets into college, he starts doing the same thing. He starts drinking alcohol, he starts going to parties, and then down the road, we see him that he's lost all his religion, like in college, basically. So that's the end of the skit. So what I wanted to talk about, the first thing that's most impactful is video game addiction. It's the third aspect that's harmful to worldview, because what that does is it starts making the child addicted to material pleasure. So the material pleasure is what starts driving him to do things. So he starts indirectly attaching value to physical pleasure through the video game addiction. And that way, it's a gateway to other sins, because other things that give you material pleasure are, for example, alcohol, partying, girlfriends. All these things give you material pleasure, but at the expense of sinning. So that video game addiction is super important as a gateway. So it's almost like a gateway drug in a sense, because you can get hooked on it. There's even like psychological disorders where it's kind of in the spectrum of like video game addiction. But the second thing that the article mentions is desensitization to sin. So all those things he sees in the video game, gambling, partying, all these things are sins. But in game, you can argue actually the exposure to inappropriate content is a sin indirectly, because you're seeing people dressed inappropriately. But for example, gambling in game is not quote unquote technically a sin, but it desensitizes you to doing that sin in real life. So it's still damaging to your worldview, especially to a child. If one of us like play a video game in our 30s where you're gambling, like who cares? Like we know it's haram, but a kid doesn't understand that. Sorry, I'll take your question in just a second. And the last thing, so sort of the icing on the cake is the harmful role model, because those things enter the child's psyche and affects their worldview such that they start thinking these things are good, whereas these things are in reality bad. So that's why GTA in particular is a dangerous game to play. But the article, you guys can take that home and read about it. We can discuss it more. Just wanted to give you a brief overview of it. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Yeah, go ahead.
So when you talked about him like losing his like religion, like coming home and playing, with that like he was breaking like his ideology wall in that graph that you drew?
I think probably what actually gets affected first is your worldview. Because the ideology is your behavior. So when your behavior is changing, like these are actually like sort of like they kind of branch outward. So once your worldview changes, your behavior is going to change. So actually like we're kind of fooling ourselves even as adults. If we're, for example, performing a sin, where we say, oh, like my worldview is proper, like I believe in Allah, then why are you sinning is the question. Like maybe you're saying on your lips that you believe something, but you don't believe it deep inside your heart. Because if you believed it deep inside your heart, you wouldn't be doing something that God didn't want. So your behavior is actually a good judge of what your worldview is, but it's your true worldview, not what you say your worldview is. If that makes sense.
The verse of the Quran that
Yeah.
made me think of was as-salat tanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkar.
Right.
So
Yeah.
And the other one was like إليه يصعد الكلم الطيب وتعالى
Right.
محمد الصالح يرفع. But the idea is that the action and the belief or the idea have different roles.
Yeah, Asan. Those are excellent verses. Yeah, go ahead.
So it's not really a question. I wanted to just add on to what you like drew, like were explaining. I feel like there's like a fourth wall that's like implicated, and like I'm saying this from my experience, because I used to be in like the kids' place where as a teenager going like I would come home and I'd just play games.
Sure.
Like skip Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, just playing games, not listening to it. So I was at that point, but then I think it was like through playing too much, I realized like, oh, this is bad. Yeah, and now I'm more I guess you could say like mature, like or more control of my video game addiction. Like when I get on, I'm playing with my friends, and it's like Maghrib time, and like they're not Muslims, but I tell them like I have to go pray, and I pause my game and I actually go pray. So there's like I guess it's like from experience, like having to experience the bad, like you grow out to. It depends on how you grow out. You can either go bad or like change yourself.
I feel like it's an age thing too. Like I think it's something that you maybe grew out of. Like I think it's easier for kids to get sucked into it than it is for maybe an adult.
It could be the realization that the value
of time
is not being provided anymore. Unfortunately, in this age now we have game streaming and people making money off just playing, making money off watching people playing. And people, it's pretty wild out there now.
Yeah.
I think in the stage that we're at least, you realize that what is value and what value am I providing by what value is this game providing me? Like, is there a good story here? Is it, what am I getting out of this?
It's so interesting how humans allocate value to things.
Yeah.
It's a very funny process.
I wanted to discuss the limbic system hijack that you're talking about.
Yeah, like the dopamine rush and everything.
It gets very deep, actually.
Yeah.
Very deep, especially in an early stage. Not only because you start, associating dopamine, spikes with things that don't have value, as well as things that will keep asking for you to get them. So
Sure.
The game industry is designed to get your money, basically. And the way to get the money is to have you spend time on there and keep buying, downloadable content. Keep playing. They want to just keep playing.
Right.
And your brain is also designed, to survive by having good, right? Dopamine is good.
Right.
So
exactly,
it's very harsh, and it's no surprise that you hear about, especially in Korea, unfortunately, and other places, where a week of just playing the same video game, people just and peeing in bottles and
yeah.
I played it when it first came out.
Talk about it's reality.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Talk about it as a joke, but it has become a reality where it's pretty crazy, and then you look at it, you're like, well, this is crazy, but to this person.
Yeah.
Well, what about values that maybe they're streaming and they're getting money out of it. I don't know. And that's a different discussion. Well, does money have value? I don't know.
Yeah. I'll share one quick story. Actually, the sheikh that advised us about the video games told us one story. He does counseling for different communities. So he actually went to a community, I think, in Dar es Salaam, and he said there was a couple there who were having like marital issues. So he went to go see like what's the issue and stuff. So the story was the man would come home from work and just play video games all day. Like he has kids and he has a wife, but he would just go into his room, play video games, and then just go to sleep. And then he would go to work the next day, come back and play video games. Like he wouldn't spend time with his wife, he wouldn't spend time with his kids. So yeah.
I don't know if it's actually him being only addicted.
Yeah.
Maybe also because he's got stresses now.
Yeah.
Right.
But he wants to feel happy.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So I'm trying to resolve these stresses. This makes me unhappy. So let me just.
Immediate happiness.
Right.
It's the actual true definition of addiction, right?
Yeah. So the way he approached it, he tried suggesting to him like traditions from the Ahlul Bayt and from the Imam, saying you should be using your time to worship Allah, to spend time with your family. But the guy just wasn't getting it. And he said that the barrier there is he's gotten to a point where his worldview had changed. Like he's now prioritizing physical pleasure. Like he doesn't care about what the Ahlul Bayt or what Allah says. He only wants to satisfy his own nafs. Like he's got to that point where he's buying into the materialistic worldview. So his problem, he needs to fix his worldview, and then he'll change his behavior. But that worldview needs to come from the person himself. He needs to realize like my worldview is off. Like what I'm valuing is not correct. When that person realizes that, then he can start changing. So that's what he was saying. Yeah, he needs professional help. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
One thing about it is also coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
So this is like something I think Musa, you remember, like we studied it. Actually, all of us probably do biology, right? Like it's like there's what they call mature coping mechanisms and immature coping mechanisms, and a lot of people go into the immature coping mechanisms and they use those and of course maybe it's a little arbitrary what defines.
Some people say this is a mature coping mechanism. Some people say, oh, you go play some video games, you can release your stress. That's mature.
Right.
but you know, it's like I think yeah, that's where the worldview comes in. It's like what is a mature coping mechanism and what's an immature one. Some people say, yeah, oh, video games, what's wrong with that? You know, there's nothing wrong
You're
with
angry,
that.
go kill some people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. But
Right.
it's like your worldview actually dictates what is a mature coping mechanism and
Yeah.
what is not. Right?
You know what that makes me think of is like when you give a child the option to have a treat now or later, if they can delay gratification.
Or if you share it, you get more. If you don't share.
Yeah, so I like the delayed one where you get more if you delay your gratification or delay your. So you're willing to you're able to comprehend that. Kind of like we were talking about earlier, like a trader. Like you know, the better trade is if you come later, and so you're making this. If you're an adult, the trade that you're gonna make isn't this immediate gratification through this video game. You're supposed to really, oh, okay, if I really want to relax and be happy, maybe I should spend time with my wife and kids, and they'll bring me happiness for the rest of my life, right? You know, these kids when they grow up, they'll make me happy, right? It's the ability to be able to take now or stretch it out further. Even though we know stretching it out further is better, we sometimes fall for the easier one, like a mature adult, like is a mature coping.
You know, there's a famous saying. It says "حُفَّتِ الْجَنَّةُ بِالْمَكَارِهِ وَحُفَّتِ النَّارُ بِالشَّهَوَاتِ." So it means that heaven is surrounded by basically things that are disliked or things that are, you know, maybe reprehensible, right? And hellfire is surrounded by desires, right? So what does that mean? It's in the sense that you know, the people who are willing to kind of endure and persevere, they face so much hardship, so much difficulty in their life, but they're willing to kind of be patient. They're the ones who get heaven. But those who just want the instant pleasure, instant desire, you know, fulfilling every whim that comes to them, they're the ones who go to hell, right? Right? That you seek this world and you know you don't look for you just completely abandon the hereafter, right? So yeah, that's a huge thing, and I think that unfortunately is a big reason why video games can shift your worldview even, because it's like, you know, it's making you focus more. Even a lot of these, it's not just video games, so it's like even social media, right?
Yeah.
Social
You can get addicted to like the swiping.
nucleus accumbens your
Anime. When I was in middle school, high school, I was
romance books.
watching 300 episodes of Naruto over the summer break. It's
Yeah.
not good.
Yeah.
You're reminding me of my Counter-Strike days, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I think it's anything that's like materialistic and like people like give it value. Like it doesn't have value, people give it.
It's not real. It doesn't have real value. It has no true value.
Unfortunately, a kid cannot have a distinction of what value is yet, or at least hasn't been taught that. So for them, it's just like, oh yeah, this is great. Feels good.
Yeah.
Feels good.
There's money, there's whatever.
I know. Yeah. No. And I think the most dangerous thing is when the parents don't realize what's going on. Like, because the parents have the ability to change that scenario, but they often don't realize, hey, this video game's hurting my child. They're like, oh, like I need a break. I need to go do my own thing. Just play this video game for a couple hours. Like, but they don't realize it's hurting them. You know? So yeah.
I think that was one of my factors too. Like I would play, like I wouldn't listen to my parents saying like, oh, it's bad for you, it's bad for you. But
Okay.
as soon as when I grew up, like it hit to me because like
Oh,
their
it
words
really is.
finally got to me. That's what.
Yeah. No, but I mean, you're actually lucky you have parents that say it's bad for you. Like, so some parents would even say like, go ahead, like enjoy. You know? So yeah.
Different for me.
Right.
Like, I would have like it would have been longer for me to come to a realization.
Absolutely.
I mean, now it's even a stereotype now, because our age, we didn't have like EPL, we didn't have all these game leagues where you actually can get like monetary prizes now.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. They can make it a career. Yeah. Yeah.
Playing video games and being
Yeah.
and competing with each other. I don't know if it's like a healthy competition either. Like some of these games just
Yeah.
It's we really have to look deep into like, is this valuable or not, or
Yeah. But I think it's especially important for us to realize this worldview aspect, because a lot of us have played video games when we were kids. Like our parents didn't, so they were like, "Don't play this." Like I never played it when I was growing up, but we often have played it. So we actually know like what the experience is like, and even though we might have had fun in those days, we got to make sure that our kids are, even if they're gonna have fun doing it, we have to be aware to control it and be aware of what they're playing and know what the worldview is that they're exposed to when they're playing. because I don't think it's feasible. Even in that article I mentioned, like they did a study in Iran, like in the area where a lot of control is exerted, and like 93% of the kids were playing video games. It didn't matter whether they were male or female either, because even females can play like mobile games. They still like playing games. They may not play like Xbox and PlayStation, but they still play games. You know, yeah. So I mean, like 93% of Iranian children are playing. You can imagine like it's the whole world that's playing video games when they're kids. You know, so
I just
yeah.
want to talk the next thing about this.
Yeah.
Which is a video game in its essence bad? You know,
No, and that's the thing. Like I think we got to it at the end about solutions. There's a lot of like workshops that we suggested, but the biggest thing that the Sheikh actually recommended is we need like Shias with the proper worldview that are making video games that can like embed the correct Islamic worldview into the game, and then it'll be positive for the child instead of hurting them. You know, so that's the future. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. There are actually some games that were very educational. There actually
Sure.
Some games
Yeah.
that actually were intentionally educational, where they actually teach you, like they'll give you incentives to like learn math, learn like and I know it had a great effect on me in my schooling because I actually
Yeah.
really excelled in school. Well, honestly, because of those education I actually got from those games.
Mhm.
And there's something actually talking history, you know. So I think that the two big things are what's the intention of the game, you know, and also are you limiting your time with this dopamine cycle that you're getting out of it?
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
I think those are the two big things that I would say if I were to change anything for Muslims is I would get a bunch of programmers and game developers that would intentionally make things that are actually useful, that actually give you value to your life, that apply to you, to like value to your life. Tell you who the imams are, tell you history of Imam Jawad.
Right.
Things that actually will describe.
Yeah. Exactly.
Simulate like the story of Imam Jawad alayhi salam, like you get
Assassin's Creed, you know what it's made me think of? Like something like Assassin's
100%.
Creed.
Be like a Shia
You
about
do
it.
history, but you still get to do some like real
Yeah.
time.
But see,
action.
I think the yeah.
Living at that time. Abbasi's are against you, and some of the Shias are
Right.
against you, and you go to like Sham, and you're like everyone's against you.
Assassin's Creed is a good example.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the problematic aspect of video game developers today is they all have a materialistic worldview. So actually, they want to maximize the addictive potential to maximize their profits. Like in the same way, the fast food industry is like the unhealthiest possible to make it the best tasting, so that way it's the unhealthiest. So
This fear about
yeah.
what pushes things, I'm sorry,
Right.
is also like what are the algorithms that are feeding our feed, and then the next
Yeah.
step is this artificial intelligence that's coming
Right.
down upon us. Like,
Yeah.
what is what is it programmed to seek? Is it profit seeking? Is it truth seeking? Is it corruption seeking? Like what is its goal? Like because the goal is embedded in it, right? Like
It was programmed.
it's programmed into it by the worldview and the ideology of the people who create it.
Yeah.
Right? That was the big issue with like Twitter before Elon came, was that it's a bunch of these liberals out in Northern California who want a specific worldview to be expressed, right?
Yeah.
The whole thing with censorship too, like we want a specific worldview to come out.
Yeah, I think if there's one takeaway from this, it's that whenever you consume a product, you're consuming a worldview. Like always think about that, because us as adults, we need to be very conscious of what we're doing, and that way, when we have kids, we can educate them as well. So just make sure, because it can change your whole life. Like if you just think about it, like all the products you're exposed to from day to day, and you start thinking about the worldview embedded in there, it'll just make you a lot more cognizant. So I think since I attended that class, like it's been really helpful for me in my life so
Why
far.
has our production been lacking as Muslims or particularly as Shias? Why have we not is it because we've been repressed? Is it because we're just delayed?
I think it's no. I think
we don't see value.
yeah. Yeah, no, I think a lot of us have bought into the modern world. Honestly, like we're perfectly happy with consuming these modern products.
Why can't we make a video game?
Because we feel we don't need to. There's already video games. We're like, we like these ones. Why do we want to make another one? You know? Like we have to realize that we don't like these and we want to make our own. Then that'll, as long as us as Muslims are happy with these modern products, we're not going to make new products. You know. So we just have to educate ourselves that these are dangerous products and we don't want to use these products. And then that'll spur the creative potential to make more. You know. Yeah.
PBS is very good on this. You know, you're
Yeah.
boycott, divest, sanction. You know, if you're buying products that are supporting
Sure.
You know,
That
killing
worldview, yeah.
and death and destruction.
Exactly.
Like, why are you purchasing these products, right?
Yeah.
You're supporting something.
Right.
So, and, but understanding that everything has a worldview and ideology, I think is essential for how we approach the Western world, right? Like, you know, how things are marketed to us, how things are, you know, propaganda from the government. All of that is coming from a specific worldview and ideology. And so, I really appreciate you showing us how it's impacting a video game, but also like the products, like the things that we buy. It is really important because you know where we spend our money is one of those choices we make.
I think the world itself is getting like really materialistic. Like as the time goes on, it gets worse and worse. Like added a sports betting. So there's sports, and now they added a betting into it. So you bet on a player.
Okay.
So like they want you to gamble as much.
So you know it's fixed.
Wow.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's getting worse, man. Be careful,
Everything
guys.
is like it like becomes. They want everything to become an addiction.
Yeah.
Right.
Best indicator for the presidential election is actually Vegas betting.
What?
Really?
Wait, how does that work?
Yeah, you can bet on the presidential election.
Guys, I think we can end now. Just make it informal, all right?
There's, oh, so